I never thought I would be the type of person to pull something like this off. But sometimes when you're cornered, you either fight back or let yourself be buried alive. I'm not a fighter in the traditional sense. I'm the quiet one in the office, the person who just does her work, keeps her head down, and tries to stay away from the politics that happen when people in power decide to flex. But this is the story of how I got pushed too far, how my boss tried to shove his nephew into my job, and how I decided that if I was going down, I was taking their little scheme down with me. I work in compliance. Most people hear that, and their eyes glaze over, but for me it's a mix of puzzle solving, policy checking, and paperwork that can either protect a company or destroy it if ignored. Basically, I'm the one who makes sure we're not breaking laws, not misreporting finances, and not putting the business at risk of fines or worse. It's not glamorous, but it matters. And after nearly 8 years with this company, I had built up a reputation of being reliable and thorough. Not flashy, not loud, but dependable. Then we got a new director. He wasn't some evil cartoon villain, but he had that smug air about him. The kind of man who thinks he's smarter than everyone else, when in reality, his power comes from who he knows, not what he knows. Within a few months, it became clear that he liked surrounding himself with people who made him feel like the smartest guy in the room. He started hiring people who were connected to him socially, not people who were necessarily qualified. And when his nephew showed up, fresh out of college with zero relevant background, I knew exactly what was about to happen. The first time I met the nephew, he tried to explain my own job to me. He had read a blog post somewhere about compliance best practices and thought that gave him the authority to criticize the system I had spent years building. I smiled, nodded, and let it go. But a week later, the director called me into his office and started hinting that maybe it was time for me to take on more of a support role so that the nephew could get real-world leadership experience. Translation: he wanted me to train the kid to take my job, while I got pushed into the background like some sort of assistant. I went home that night and cried in my car before walking into my house. I felt humiliated. I had given nearly a decade of my life to this company, and I was about to get erased because someone with the right last name wanted to play boss. I told myself I'd just deal with it, but then I remembered something. Compliance has teeth. People like my director forget that. They think it's just paperwork and boring manuals, but those boring manuals are the difference between a company thriving or getting slammed with massive penalties. I didn't want to play dirty, but I also wasn't going to let myself get tossed aside quietly. So I started documenting every little corner the nephew tried to cut, every suggestion from my director that veered into gray areas, every rushed project that ignored procedure. I wasn't sabotaging anything. I wasn't even going out of my way. I was literally just doing my job the way I always had, documenting. Only now, I was making copies and timestamping everything in a way that could be traced back to me. If anyone later asked, I wanted to be able to prove that I had flagged the risks and been ignored. Then the nephew made his first real mistake. He approved a vendor contract without running it through me. Normally, contracts above a certain amount needed at least 2 compliance checks. He didn't even bother. He signed it off, bragged about how quickly he was streamlining things, and sent it straight to the director. I didn't find out until after it had already been executed. But when I did, I quietly wrote a memo and filed it in our compliance system, noting the violation. Fast forward 2 months. That vendor turned out to be operating without a license in one of our states. It triggered an automatic red flag with regulators. Suddenly, we had an inquiry on our hands, and the director was scrambling. The nephew tried to claim it was an oversight. But there it was, my memo, my timestamp, my proof that I had flagged the issue before it became a crisis. From there, things snowballed. Every shortcut they took, every procedure they skipped, there was a paper trail with my name on it saying, "This is non-compliant." It wasn't me being vindictive. It was me doing my job. The only difference was, I had finally accepted that maybe letting them hang themselves with their own rope wasn't the worst thing. When the regulators came down harder, demanding explanations, the director tried to throw me under the bus. He said compliance hadn't done its job. But when they pulled the files, guess whose memos and reports were neatly lined up, showing exactly what had been missed and by whom. The nephew looked like he was going to cry in the meeting. The director turned red and started blaming communication breakdowns. But the regulators don't care about excuses. They care about records. and the records all pointed one way. I didn't get fired. In fact, the CEO himself called me into a private meeting after things blew over. He asked me point blank what had been happening, and I told him the truth. Calmly, without anger, just the facts. He listened, nodded, and thanked me. A few weeks later, the director was transitioned out. The nephew quietly disappeared too. I never saw him again. Do I feel guilty? Sometimes. I think about how much stress it must have caused them when everything unraveled. But then I remind myself that they were perfectly fine with throwing me away to make room for someone who hadn't earned it. They underestimated me because I don't shout or make a scene. They thought I was powerless. But compliance isn't powerless. It's the one part of a business that has the final word, whether people realize it or not. I'm not some mastermind. I didn't orchestrate a grand revenge. I just stopped protecting people who refused to listen. And when the dust settled, I was still standing, while the ones who thought they were untouchable were gone. Now my job feels different. I'm respected in a way I wasn't before. People come to me with questions instead of ignoring me. And every once in a while, when I walk past the empty office that used to belong to the director, I think about how close I came to being erased, and how instead, I outlasted them by doing the one thing they never expected. My job, by the book, with every single line recorded. That was my trap. They walked right into it, and I don't regret a thing.